was the morning I had dreamed about, night after night. But now that it was here, I wanted it to stay only in my imagination. Everything I touched that morning had an effect on me. Things that I didn't even know I had made me depressed. I pocketed a pair of old chopsticks that suddenly contained all importance to me. And I stayed in my room crying, waiting for someone to come in and say goodbye to me. I waited, but no one came in. My aunt and uncle had stopped speaking to me after the first word they caught of my relationship with James. And it was hard enough not to get a goodbye from them, that I needed one even more from my parents. I didn't need them to approve of the choice I was making. I just needed them to tell me that they would miss me. I left my room and faced my father as I was to leave. He and I both knew that this would be the last time we would ever be in the same room as each other, the same country. The last time I could stand with him face to face. The word last was tattooed on everything that morning. I looked at him and he looked at me. We just stood there, blank stares, but behind them was a world of emotions that we concealed beneath our eyes. I was leaving with an American. I knew that was the only thing playing in his head, over and over again, in a lasting impression of his only daughter. He had taught me ever since I was little, if you keep your head up, nothing can cause you any harm. If you keep your head up, no one can ever bring you down. His words had changed. Once you leave, be gone. But this is when it hurt the most. I was leaving and it was real. This was my reality, and I thought that once it came time for me to actually leave, he would be different. I should have known he was never different. On the 11-day ship ride to this country, I settled my brain with this idea. I was leaving with a man that loved me, but in doing so, I was losing another. James made me see that. After I'd been in this country for 20 years, after my 5th child, Robert, was born, I got a call from my older brother, and he explained to me that my father had died, that we were orphans now, with no mother and no father. I didn't even know that my mother had died, and he explained it had been years since. He told me, "Come home, you need to be here." I agreed. In just that one moment, I had lost both my mother and my father, with no mother and no father. And I hated the fact that my own mother had been dead for years and I had no idea. It was because I had left them. If I hadn't have left, they'd still been alive. I felt so guilty. But I feared that when I went back to Japan, people would look at me and call me a traitor because I had left with the enemy. The plane ride, I was silent. The plane landed and I was spoken to only in Japanese. And I spoke only Japanese to people. That was something I hadn't experienced since I left. And I felt as though I had stepped off the platform and onto a huge warm baby blanket that would keep me safe and warm and never let me fall. I felt this joy, but I looked around and Japan was different. Everyone walking around with their heads down, that was not my Japan. And I couldn't figure out what had caused this change. I got into a taxi. On the long drive to visit my father, on the long drive to the cemetery, I realized what had changed. This place wasn't my home anymore. And I had never thought about what I had left behind because I wouldn't be a whole person if I thought only in the ways of the past. I wouldn't be a mother or any sort of wife. But what snapped me back to reality was knowing that after all, this is the small town where I met the love of my life. This is where we fell in love such a long time ago. This is my home, and this is where I started out. I'm not ashamed of that, and nor do I try to hide it. I stood before my parents' grave and studied each detail of their gravesite so that I could visit this place in my dreams. They were buried right next to each other, just like they had always wanted. They had loved each other so much. I looked up at the gray sky and back down at the even grayer tombstones with their names so elegantly engraved. I studied each crack and each line, and I couldn't bring my eyes to look away because I knew that this really was the last time. When I left so many years ago, I was wrong. This is where it ends, and I knew I had to say something. You are all the home that I have ever needed, and we have never separated, you see, because I took you with me and you kept me here. And then I put it behind me, and I walked away with my head held so high, I knew my father would be proud. Nothing could ever bring me down. He was right.